Welcome to the Daily Path Podcast. I'm Nick Robinson.
And I'm Elena Robinson.
Elena, we have some topics today that are not my favorite to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're talking about sexual immorality.
Yep.
And the reason that I don't like talking about these things is because I feel like growing up as a youth in the church, one of the only things people wanted to talk to me about was sex. Don't do it. Period. And as a young male, that was not always the most helpful way to hear about sex. And when I read the New Testament for myself, like we're encouraging people to do as part of this process, it talks about a lot of things other than sex.
Yeah.
And so it always felt to me dishonest, disingenuous, misleading for youth directors, youth camps, whoever, to spend so much time talking about sex. Now, I get sex for teenagers can have some pretty negative consequences, but I don't think that excuses us from offering the whole gospel to people, no matter their age.
There's a lot of good stuff in the New Testament.
There is. And you know what it talks about more than sex? Money. You know what they didn't talk to me about ever? Money. You know, it talks about a lot, because even in this section of 1 Corinthians chapter 5, there's a whole list as you go down in the story in verse 10. But I wasn't talking about the sexually immoral people in the outside world by any means, or the greedy, the swindlers, or the people who worship false gods. Otherwise, you would have to leave the world entirely. So in verse 10 here, the greedy, swindlers, people who worship false gods, all of these people are being lumped into the same category.
Yeah.
Here the sexuality part is a big deal because there is someone committing like incest or something like that is going on here. Something that everybody in the world back then and now would agree is bad. It's not a debatable proposition.
Yeah. And
this person was part of the community at Corinth, and Paul is worked up about it. And Paul,
that he is.
Yeah, he gets to this point where he's like, you shouldn't associate with such a person in the church. You can't change it out in the outside world. There are dealings in the outside world. You got to deal with a broader range of people. But in your community, in your church, there's not room for such a person. And for me, that's the tension I want to talk about. Because Paul's saying, hey, don't let this person be in your community of faith, because like a tiny grain of yeast makes a whole batch rise, one person will ruin the whole batch of your church, perhaps. And first, I want to know, is that true?
Is what true? The yeast part? Or
let's assume the metaphor part is true, or the simile or whatever. Let's assume that one grain of yeast is enough to leaven a whole batch of bread. Let's just assume that part's true. Is one bad person enough to ruin one church, one basketball team, one whatever?
I think it could impact, but ruin is such a strong word.
It is.
And I would like to think that it couldn't ruin something.
Yeah. One mischievous... what kind of effect does one mischievous student have in a classroom of 25 second graders?
I mean, you're going to impact a couple of other kids, but not all of them.
Yeah. You might impact the learning of all of the kids to some degree. You might be able to recruit a couple other rebels to go with you, but there's going to be a teacher's pet or two in there as well that is so busy helping out their teacher that they don't notice all of the
other stuff going on.
Or they're such rule followers, they're going to be calling out their peers who aren't following the rules and telling them they need to be doing them. So it's not that a mischievous student would ruin a class. Certainly not that. Not that they could turn the whole class against the teacher.
Right.
But they might affect the experience of the whole class to some degree. Now, does that mean we should kick that student out of school?
No.
No.
I laugh because, I mean, that in my world, like, that's what I am trying to help students with.
So you're often
you're
the one
fairly passionate about it.
You're specifically assigned to that mischievous student sometimes. Like that.
Yeah, not always.
Yeah, but sometimes.
Yeah.
There is an overlap between the students you work with and the students who might be mischievous.
Yeah.
Because students can be mischievous for all kinds of reasons.
Oh, yes.
They might be bored. They might have stuff going on at home. Mm-hmm. They might be seeking attention. They might, who knows what, they might be covering up for a skill that they don't have, that they should be, that they feel embarrassed about not having already. No. I mean, you're more of an expert than me, but there's all kinds of reasons a student might be acting out.
And really, there's studies showing that it is not helpful to remove students for that type of behavior for a multitude of reasons. But that's, another topic for another podcast, maybe.
Yeah, we should do an education episode. Maybe I'll get on my public school is good soapbox sometime. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if other people care to hear me talk about that. So in the classroom, one mischievous, I don't want to call him bad student. I don't think moralizing a person that way is healthy for us. But one mischievous student doesn't ruin class, but certainly impacts it.
Yeah.
Now, how in a church, because Paul's talking specifically about faith communities, how can we imagine one misled person affecting a church?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you see somebody making choices. I mean, as you said, like in this passage, it's maybe like inbred type of thing. Like if people see that, they're like, oh, that looks like a good idea. They're a good person. I'm going to follow suit. Like,
yeah, especially if that person is held up as an example of positive faith. Right. And then you see something that they're doing, it might have the wrong message to other people looking to deepen their faith.
Correct.
Yeah. Cause I want to shift our thinking about the classroom for a second.
Okay.
What effect does one mischievous teacher have on a classroom?
Oh, that I think has a bigger impact.
Right? Like if there's one teacher that's like, let's change our metaphor or understanding of the classroom example for a second. Let's say that the teacher shows up and they're normally a good teacher, great teacher. We love our teachers. We don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but let's just say they show up and they're in a grumpy mood that day. Mm-hmm. How can that day compare to a day that they're on their game?
It's going to be rough, right? I mean, like I've been that teacher where,
no way.
Yeah. I mean, we all have bad days, right? And then we
speak for yourself. I'm a pastor. Never had a bad day in my life.
But I mean, I find that when I am having a bad day, then it continues to get bad because that's the mindset I'm in, right? And like I'm maybe, choosing to continue and not like try to change it at all.
Yeah. And like, I had a teacher in elementary school. His name was Mr. Newton. He was one of my favorite teachers. I had him in 5th and 6th grade, if I remember correctly. Mr. Newton used words towards us that teachers would not be allowed to use today, probably. Mm-hmm. You at least hear about it. He called us bricks, not like in a complimentary way. He didn't say you're as strong as a brick. You're more like dumb as a brick, kind of. Mm-hmm. You're a lost ball in tall weeds, kind of like he'd say those kinds of things. But you can imagine a teacher who doesn't respect authority above them, and then that their students picking up on that, and then their students don't respect them. Or I'm a teacher who is sarcastic and mean towards other kids, and now the students in my classroom have picked up that that's okay behavior.
Yeah.
And now they're mean and sarcastic to their peers.
Yeah.
Like I have no examples. I don't remember 5th grade or 6th grade being particularly bad because kids are still kids too, being mean to each other. But I could imagine that scenario where that happens. Mm-hmm. So back to our church example, we said that if you're holding this up as positive behavior, holding up a person as a positive person, and then they have this bad behavior, then that might start setting a bad example for people.
Yeah.
And I would say, especially if that person is the leader. That's why when pastors have indiscretions, it's where we should be removed.
Yeah.
Maybe given a chance to heal, maybe not, depending on what, before we, like, some things you can maybe heal from and come back and be a fruitful pastor, and some things you may not be able to heal from That doesn't mean you're excommunicated from the church necessarily, but it may mean that you're not eligible for full-time ministry anymore.
Yeah.
So we have this example where Paul says yeast works throughout the whole batch. We've talked about how sometimes people don't seem to work through the whole batch, but it can happen if it's a person of authority, especially, or someone who maybe, like we talked about yesterday, has a unique blend of confidence and can get people to follow them. If they're actively recruiting people to practice greed or idolatry or sexual immorality, and they're recruiting people to do the same thing, that could be a danger to a body. So Paul talks about not associating with people like this in the body of faith. We also believe in grace.
Yeah, that's what, like, as we've been talking about this, I'm like, but grace, like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like, I just, as we're talking about this, it's like, come on, like, where is this grace and accountability, like, right?
Correct.
I mean,
Yeah.
It's not just being like, oh, you know, that's so-and-so,
Yeah.
like,
Because
doing what they do.
That happens in churches too, where someone's behavior gets excused, someone's unhealthy, destructive behavior gets excused because, well, they're so-and-so and they've been here for a long time or whatever.
In church and outside of churches, right? Like, that's something that...
I'm more familiar with church life.
Right, yes. But I think it's also holding people accountable. So I keep, as we've been talking, grace has been in my head, and then like iron sharpens iron, where we hold each other accountable, right? And we can do that nicely and also firmly and help people. I mean, that doesn't mean that just because they've made a wrong decision doesn't mean that they are a bad person.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that, well, bye, see ya. Like,
yeah. And it doesn't mean that God doesn't love them anymore.
Correct.
Or that God has left them, or that God is far away from them.
Yeah.
God is still there waiting on them to turn toward God.
Mm-hmm.
And so the church is called to walk this tough line of grace and accountability, of associating with people with problems, but also having high standards for who we are called to be.
Yeah.
Because we all have problems to some degree.
Yeah.
And so I think in practice, this comes down to a case-by-case basis sometimes. Like if it's something that raises enough attention, not because people found out, because sometimes we don't do something about it because we can bury it.
Yeah.
That's not healthy. That's not of God. But if it raises to a certain severity level, and I don't know if I'm qualified right now to say what that level is, but at some point there needs to be a conversation with the person, with the leadership. Is this the kind of behavior that we're looking for in someone? And if not, what should we do? How do we go to the person? What do we say to the person? What are we trying to bring out of that person? What behavior change do we need to see in that person? Does that limit their participation in the church? Does that limit their participation in the leadership of the church? So one example of this is that churches sometimes will have people who have been convicted of serious sexual crimes against minors.
Yeah.
So we at Asbury do thorough background checks on anyone who is working with kids, so that to protect our children and vulnerable adults.
Yeah.
Because that is a non-negotiable, right?
Yeah.
Kids have to be safe. But sometimes churches, and I don't know of anybody at Asbury that would meet this definition, but have somebody with a problem background.
Yeah.
And churches have sometimes made accommodations like, okay, you can come to worship, but you need to be with this other person at all times. Or if it's a building where all the children's activities are in like one corner, you can't be in that half of the building. Like people will put safeguards in place even as they're trying to make room for grace. Yeah. So there's that compromise there, and those are hard lines to draw. So that's one just kind of really specific and really tense place where churches have walked that line before that I've been aware of.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate reality.
It is.
As you're talking, I put my teacher hat on, and, when I am working with kids that maybe have quote unquote behaviors, which can be a wide range of things, really, but, we look at what happens before the behavior and how do they respond? And it's such a deeper thing than just making a quote unquote wrong choice.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big part of it too, is getting to know and understand as much as you can the situation. Because more often than not, there's something underlying there, right? When we look at little kids, some of their stuff is because they can't communicate, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
why do babies cry? Because they can't say I'm hungry, or that my diaper is dirty, or that I'm tired.
Right. There is a reason for every choice and behavior. And so that's one of the things in my job that I am doing all of the time is like, well, why did my student choose to do that? What was happening? What was going on? Like, so not being quick to judge, but really looking at the big picture.
Yeah. And I know in your circumstances, and I've seen it in churches too, where you need to bring in not just a group of people, but sometimes you might need an expert too. Mm-hmm. Or in the church world, in the Methodist church world, you might need a district superintendent.
Yeah.
You might need somebody who has experience with this kind of thing before. Mm-hmm. Maybe multiple times they've had experience with this. And they said, well, we showed this grace this way one time and that worked great. Or we showed grace this one way and that was terrible. Mm-hmm. That's one reason I'm thankful to be part of the United Methodist Church and to have hierarchy, even as frustrating as it can be sometimes, and for myriad reasons.
Yes.
It's also nice to know that if there's an emergency, there's someone who has experience to lean on.
Yeah.
Who also has a group of peers with experience to lean on. Well, we have gone on for a while today. Yes. So why don't we close in prayer?
Sounds good.
Gracious God, you have called us to be your church, which is simply the people who follow after you and gather in your name. God, in our gatherings, there are countless broken people. We are all broken when we show up. God, help us to have grace for each other in our brokenness. And when something rises above and starts affecting the group in negative ways, give us the discernment to see what is happening. Help us to convene leaders who look towards you for a way to handle the situation and to do it with grace and accountability, with the eye of the health of the person and also the body of believers in sight. And so, God, we ask that you would raise up wise leaders for such a time as this and such a time as these that we read about. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. For Elena Robinson, I'm Nick Robinson, and you are on the Daily Path.